Coach Axtell, hey, thanks for joining me today on this simple coach-to-coach interview. Do appreciate, as always, it is good to catch up, my friend.
Appreciate it. You too. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Hey, I usually start out with the simple of questions. Without prompting, somebody asks you how your season went. How did your season go?
Oh, what a loaded question that is.
You know what? It's not called the hot seat for nothing.
That's true. Good. Like if you just had to put a word on it, it was good. Certainly not the best we've had here in the last 10 years, but still very good. We were a really good team. I think winning the league in the conference that we're in is a tall order, and the seniors that we are graduating this May have won 3 of their 4 years since COVID. So kudos to them. They've had a phenomenal career. They might be the most decorated group of seniors that has gone through the program. So in that regard, I think they had higher hopes for the NCAA tournament. But aside from that alone, I think, the season was really good.
Yeah. What were your what's that?
Stumped you with that one.
Yeah, he did. What were your expectations for the year? Can I ask that in hindsight? Like, what were you guys saying amongst yourselves? Like, what you hope to accomplish?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I haven't had a team go past the Sweet 16. So, I mean, that's inherent. I think every group wants to be the first in kind of my era here at Cortland to do that. Certainly their goals were to do that as seniors because they had gone, the last 3 years they had gone. So, to fall short of that, I think was something that, they weren't anticipating, or they certainly, would not have picked. So I think that's probably number one, their goal. But also, I don't know, I'm a realist, and the game's really hard, and teams are really good, and, who knows? Everything can, be going your way on paper, and then the game shows up, and it takes a life of its own. So who knows? I think having like goals that are so far in the future, I think sometimes it's hard, when you start seeing them.
And they're not real. They don't become goals at that point, Like if they're so far, like they're not really goals. They're just
for sure,
points or lines in the sand where you're like, hey, look at that, right? Or I have this theory. Like in order to get far, once you get into conference tournament, into the NCAAs, however far you go, you need all of these intangible things to line up just right so that you can extend your stay in any of the tournaments, especially the NCAAs, right? Like you just need the right draws at the right time. You got to go to penalty kicks, and you got to win the penalty kicks, and and then you get there. It's never this walk through the park. It's going to be easy, and just because, like you said, the competition is so good.
And this year too, with the new NPI system, I mean, Messiah as a first round game for us was brand new for our group. Like usually you're not getting Messiah out of the gate. And I think their ranking was probably lower than who they truly were as a team. A little bit. I mean, they were quality. And I think they were probably, I think the first half of their season let them down in the rankings a little bit as opposed to the second half. So that was a tough first game, right from the jump. And even, just like trying to make sense of our ranking and, what it used to look like and what the draw used to look like. I mean, we still ended up 1 in the region going into the tournament, but then we felt like we were not given, the courtesy of being 1 in the region with the draw that we got and, the games that we had to play. So who knows? A different path, I think, for everybody now with the NPI stuff. Unless you're one of those top 8. I mean, who knows, really?
At that point, I hate to say it, if you're not top 8, not that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't really matter at that. That's when you sort of need all of this extra stuff to sort of play out just perfectly for you. I just think it's a really hard road regardless
Yeah.
regardless of your rank, your team, like, it doesn't matter. It's a hard road to hoe. Um, were there any surprises for you this year? Was there anything that surprised you about your team?
Oh, let's see. And we had two ACLs. We had some injuries. We
Oof.
hit the injury bug pretty hard in the middle of the season. Um, and even some guys that were able to come back,
Mm-hmm.
hit like a rough spot in the middle of the year with, just like the 2 week kind of injuries, right? Where like if it's the wrong 2 weeks in your season,
You're
uh,
done. You're
you
screwed.
can have an ankle sprain that's great,
Yeah.
for some games
Yeah.
to miss, and then but if it's 2 weeks later, you're kind of screwed. So
Yeah.
we had the injury bug a little bit, but I felt like like the depth of our team and the guys that came in and had to like kind of reclaim spots in the depth chart higher than they were, and I think they did a really good job of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pleasantly surprised that we weathered the storm of injuries that I don't think in previous years maybe we had the depth to do so. So
Yeah.
that was a good thing.
Hey, I'm going to ask you. This is a loaded question, as they all are. What team surprised you the most this year?
Hmm. Uh, Buff State, I guess, number one is like they had a hell of a year.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big jump in level for them, I think, from the previous year to this past year, just in how they played, their identity. Um,
They
and
kind
college
of
side was
came
tricky.
up out of nowhere for me. Like like, who are
Yeah,
these guys? Yeah.
and they had like the right balance of work rate, athleticism, um, shape in the
Mm-hmm.
back. Their goalkeeper had a good year, two athletic center backs. Like they had a good recipe and they kind of put a lot of good pieces together. So credit to them. And then they had the like really special kids in the attack that
Yeah.
I think that's the college soccer recipe. Like most of the goals are in transition.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of teams, you would have the ball against them almost to your detriment at
Mm-hmm.
times.
Mm-hmm. I could
Um,
totally see that.
and I think a lot of teams fell victim to that with
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
this year. So they had a great year. That was good for the league.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Good for the conference to see, someone that was usually in that like kind of 4 or 5 spot really climb
Yeah.
out of
Yeah.
that. Who else? Maybe that's the only like big surprise I think for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The I they lulled you to sleep. I noticed watching a number of their games towards the latter half of the season. Like you said, you think you have possession and you think you're owning the game, and they were so quick on transition, and they had the couple kids, the Mario, I forget his name,
Manu.
Marco, Manu. Oh, that guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like, they had those guys who were just could turn it around so quickly, and I think if you weren't careful, you got bit by that, right? Like, I
Oh, for
think,
sure. Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
Tufts experienced that, right? And when they
for
played
sure.
them like to a T, you wouldn't have thought that they were getting out of there alive, and then they
Yeah.
just one chance, one goal, and it made
Yeah.
all the difference. I think
And
that's.
I mean, we went into the final and we tied them regular season in the last game of the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I felt like I mean, we didn't really need to give up the goal that we gave up in
Mm-hmm.
that game. Ended up 1-1. But more so, I think you kind of like the game all of a sudden is over and you're like, dang, how did we not create more than we just did? And so going into the final, I think a big push was just like foot on the gas all the time. Like, don't be
Yeah,
comfortable with the ball. You kind of have to be on edge
yeah,
with the ball and without the ball at all times. Like, you can't let them, like you said, lull you to sleep.
yeah,
You
yeah,
have to keep creating chances. You can't
yeah,
just have the ball. It's not good
yeah.
enough. Like, you
It's
have to
not good enough.
create chances. Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke with Coach Desitel from Tufts last week.
I heard, I got a bone to pick with you that he was number one on your list instead of me this year, but it's
No,
funny. He and I were
it, it's
talking.
it's like tied for one.
Okay, fair
It's
enough. Well, so I was listening to it, and then so I was giving him some stick about it. And I was like, "Yeah, just listen to your podcast,
Yeah.
whatever." And he goes, "Oh, you got to be next." And then sure as day, I open up my email, and your email just says, "You game?" question mark. I was like, "Okay, all right, there we go."
There is a list. There's an unofficial list of my favorites. Like, I go back to when I just want to talk about the game. It's like I got to get them on somehow, and I try to figure out an angle. But Um,
Maybe you could get Des and I on together. We
oh,
could
I
go.
would totally do that. I
There
would
you go.
totally do that. And I would just stir the pot for you. Like, who's the
Exactly.
better team? Who's the better coach? Let you guys go. I'll just hit record and sit
There you
back
go.
and with the popcorn.
It is. It's funny. Like he's just such a like an amazing guy. Like he was at Ithaca for a pretty short
Yeah,
stint,
yeah,
and we became so close that
yeah,
I mean, literally, we talk daily still.
yeah, yeah. He's a
I don't
great
know if I've
guy. I
seen him in
really,
person in
really
4 years, but
impressive
we
guy.
talk daily.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's
yeah.
great.
Great guy, great guy. But he was saying he he, he was saying about Buffalo State, like it the if he was going to fault his team for anything, it was trying to ram it down their throat and almost like he had to be a little bit more patient about where he was going because it's almost like they suck you into that and they're good enough and their center backs were so good you're it's not going to result in the goals that you think they are and so
Yeah.
if you're so just really really interesting. I mean it's kudos to them but um you talked about this earlier and I was going to might as well bring it up now. That the whole MPI thing. What are your thoughts? I mean, it obviously, I think it's thrown everybody for a little bit of a loop, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts on it.
It changes our world a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the draw that you get coming out by
Mm-hmm.
having a pretty similar season than we've always had.
Right.
I love that you can look back on exactly the games that kind of screw you. Like that's a good thing. You can look at the numbers and have a real good idea of where you fell short and
Yeah.
what games you needed to do better in.
Yeah.
So I like the transparency. Transparency is great.
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful. I don't know if it was like a massive shift into who was getting in the tournament or not,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you could see your steps along the way.
Yeah.
It gets kind of scary at the end when there's those like 10 teams that are fighting for the bubble.
Yeah.
And you can see like just fractions of numbers that are going to change your fate. Had we, some interesting things I think they need to do is if you tie and advance in penalties in your conference tournament, somehow we should factor that in as a win or something, right? Like that
Yeah. Yeah.
shouldn't go
Yeah.
against you
Give you
because
more points than
yeah,
than
because so like we tied Oneonta, right? Technically, won in penalties and advanced. So going into that, like if you tie, you kind of get docked some points for that,
Mm-hmm.
off your average.
Yeah.
And then if you lose, you might actually just be better off with one loss,
Yeah.
right? Like you would have a better resume NPI wise if we had
Yeah.
just lost to Oneonta
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to tie and then
Oh,
lost.
yeah. 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 That's interesting.
And so when we were crunching the numbers, like that's something that I think probably, I mean, I don't know when it's up for renegotiation, probably a couple of years, but something should be looked at in terms of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot smarter people than I that should look at it, but I know there's something there that,
Yeah.
the conference tournament is a little bit different
Mm-hmm.
and maybe needs to be treated a little different. I don't know. Other than that, I
I think
like
that
being able to see the
postseason
numbers.
play should, right? Postseason play, period. Like you get in there I don't want to say reward, but you should be rewarded for just the mere fact that you're playing the game. You've gotten this far to play the game where no one other people have not. And that should
Yeah.
there should be some benefit. And even if you tie like you said tie and advance on PKs, there should be some maybe you don't get the full weight of a regular win, but you should
Yeah.
get some weighted number for getting to the next round. I think that's totally fair.
Yeah.
I think that I do I go back and forth with this because it's not a typical right. We're talking colleges and conferences, and this is different. It's sort of like a different scenario. But I do think what MPI is doing very well is identifying who the top teams are. Like
Mhm.
right, like it's very very clear very early on who I won't say the top 8, but who are the top 15 easily. Top 20 can fluctuate, and then it's just a matter of how it all shakes out. The only other thing I would add, and I don't know your thoughts on this, is I don't think teams should be penalized for the. I get a sense that they get penalized for the conference they play in, right? Like you can't, like it, you play where you play, and there's just because, again, just because we love to beat up, and we were talking about Coach Desatel, right? NESCAC is a super strong conference, and there's certain inherent benefits to that. Well, the SUNYAC, you don't. That's not your choice. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have a choice to play. It is what it is on a yearly basis. And I think that there needs to be some accounting for that. So
Yeah. And I think, I mean, like Buffalo's resume, right, was basically like they didn't play anybody, and I mean that nicely, but
yeah,
numbers
yeah,
wise,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the
Totally
first
get
half
it.
of the season, right, and then they did well in the conference, but that ended them right on the bubble,
Yeah,
right? Like, they might have been the last team in,
yeah,
um, but I mean, it kind of shows that you can play a really weak schedule and not
yeah,
lose
yeah,
and
yeah,
be kind of right on the bubble.
yeah. I think
Um,
that's the part I'm trying to figure out too, right? Like, you knew last year or year before, I guess last year and the years prior, like you knew you had to beef up your schedule. Like whether
mhm,
you liked or like you couldn't afford to play weaker teams because that was held against you
mhm.
to a certain degree. And now it just seems like if you have a big win and you have a bunch of mediocre wins, you're in a great spot. Not mediocre wins, you know what I mean? Like you're just
Yep,
playing teams that you would normally beat up on. Like that's a benefit to you. You have the one big win, and then you could play a really relatively soft schedule. And
yep,
I'm not sure that that's a good reward. Like you want, I think teams like you and Tufts and all those, they're gonna look for those games because that's the level, right? Like they don't want to play they don't want to play wasted games. They want to take advantage of every game they play.
yep.
But they shouldn't. A team should not be. I don't want to say rewarded for being able to. Hey, we can tone down the schedule, but we're going to rack up all these wins. I don't know if that's healthy either.
For sure. And I think, I mean, just listening to guys scheduling going into next year, people are trying to get easier games
Mm-hmm.
in that like 150 to 200 range that are
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you would think would be a safe win for a lot of these teams, but,
yeah,
they're trying to go down
yeah,
the list rather than stay up.
yeah,
But it's also tricky. Like you look at the UAA, and like they did not have a good year in
mm-hmm.
terms of the numbers favoring them getting in the tournament,
Yeah,
right? Regardless of who they are as teams.
yeah,
I think in the past, they're all spread out in different regions, but their SOS is usually really high,
yeah,
and so you look at like a 9, 6, and 2, and you're like, yeah, no problem, right? Like, come on in,
yeah,
7,
yeah.
5, and
Because
whatever,
you
and like,
know that they've gone through the gauntlet the whole
yeah,
season long, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And now those aren't. I mean,
No.
those resumes we're not getting in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do think they're going to be tweaking it over time.
It'll be interesting that like that's how it landed this year with no one planning their schedule for it,
Yeah.
right? Which is pretty random. A new
Yeah.
system
Yeah.
with old
Yeah.
scheduling. And it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how in a year or two it evolves
Yeah.
with people trying to really fine tune their schedules.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, because
Yeah.
before, like you knew the numbers you kind of had to hit at SOS and win percentage.
You could do the
But
math in your head, right, and just
yeah,
be like, "This is my schedule." Blah, 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 like, okay, this is where we could land if it's favorable to us.
yeah, and it's a little fluctuating, right? Where
Yep.
you're like, all right, if we lose a couple more, the SOS,
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
but you knew the windows you kind of had to be in.
Yeah.
Now I think it's a little different because everybody's going to try and schedule differently.
Yeah. How many guys you lose into graduation and whatnot?
Too many.
Two.
Ton. Absolute ton, like 12.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um, really, really good class. I mean, again, we
Yeah.
talked about it's like the
Yeah.
most decorated class that's
Yeah.
come through.
Yeah.
Um, it like amazing kids, great people. Like they're just type A, really, really.
Hmm.
I mean,
You
we hit
lucked
the
out. I will
nail on
say,
the head with
right?
that
Like
class.
you lucked out, right? Like
Yeah.
with that group, that's for sure.
So it's interesting. Like, I mean, you can kind of like, it's not going to be as easy as just kind of plug and play with new
Hmm.
players in here and just think, oh, if we just get that same talent, we'll be as good because they had this cohesiveness too that was really special. So,
Hmm.
um, culture and all that's going to be a
Yeah.
big focus this spring and going in the
Yeah.
fall and trying to not lose the identity that that group had too.
Yeah. how as a result, how how hard are you hitting the portal if at all?
Um, I mean, in that window, pretty hard. I mean, we have 4 kids here right now that just
Yeah.
started in January, 4 transfers.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um, they're integrating really well. They're doing great. I would
Mm.
suspect there's going to be a few more in that like April,
Mm.
May window.
Yeah.
Um, the 28-man roster thing at the Division One level, that's going to affect more kids are going in, and wanting to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Kids that are cut from the very highest levels, right, are gonna.
Yep.
It's all trickle down. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Have you started seeing that already, or is it too early? Do you think?
I think so. I mean, I think some schools don't even know if they're really opting in yet or not. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like it's uncharted territory for a lot of those like mid majors that aren't really
Mm-hmm.
sure what their fate is. Um, and I would suspect, obviously, by April, they're going to have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
They're going to know. I think there was a lot of kids in this last window that still wanted that good old college try of
Yeah.
spring season, and I'm going to prove the coach wrong and not get out recruited. But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. Yeah.
we kind of know how that usually goes
Yeah.
at those levels. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of kids that are going to be in that April, May window too.
I do. I think it's going to focus a lot of players' minds on what do they want to accomplish,
Hmm.
right? Like, hey, it because we talk about it a lot. Like, is going Division 1 all of that, or is it me playing?
Hmm.
What's more important?
For sure.
And I think if they're a if they're a real player, if they're a player who, you just want to play. Like I don't like, just get me on the field. I don't want to sit on the sidelines. I think there's going to be a lot of guys who are driven or at least considering that a little bit more than they would have in the past because I think the opportunities are going to be so much thinner.
Yep.
And I think at that top level for those teams, the real elites, like there's going to be transfers in between those guys. Hey, I don't have an opportunity here, but if I take a step over, I have a better opportunity somewhere else, right? And I think that's going to be it's going to make it even harder for somebody as a freshman to break through into one
For
of
sure.
those. I think
Yep.
that's a reality.
Yeah. I mean, you have like positional constraints at those
Yeah,
levels where, you might be the fifth best goalkeeper in the country, but
yeah,
you're a freshman and you're at
yeah,
Duke and this kid's a senior,
yeah,
right? And you're like, I just want to play. And so you go to
yeah,
UNC, right? Because their
yeah,
goalkeeper just graduated. Like there's a lot of that
yeah,
finding the right niche from a
yeah.
positional standpoint. But also, I think the kids that aren't in that like upper echelon world, the mid major world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, again, like how much do you want to sit on a bench at a school that's similar to other schools, right?
Yeah,
From an academic standpoint, that it's going to cost you the same. Like, I don't know.
yeah,
You kind of run into that, like, what's the point?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And now, like, our oldest daughter, she just turned 16. Like, our biggest thing as a family, just knowing this whole thing is like, just go where you're going to be happy. Like, who cares?
yeah,
Who cares what the name of the school is?
yeah,
Like, we just want you to be happy.
yeah,
And I think sometimes kids think Division 1 is going to make them happy, and it makes them really happy in senior year because then they're right, like they put it on
yeah,
Instagram, they wear the sweatshirt around and all
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
kind of sucks when you're a freshman and you're
yeah,
not
yeah,
playing.
yeah.
That reality check.
Yeah, yeah. I think you see a lot of that too. Yeah, the Instagram pictures of, hey, I'm moving from one school to another, and they're the freshmen or the sophomores. You're like, it ain't all that wrapped up to be, what you think it is. So,
Yeah, and I
but
think your identity. I mean, you can't just single out your soccer identity, right? Like all these
no,
kids, their identity is soccer intertwined with who they are as a person. And
yeah,
so when
yeah,
you take that away and you sit on a bench for a year or two, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel,
oh,
you're kind of on the out group, right? Like
yeah.
you're not really you're never in the team talks, you're not in the
That's
plans.
personal. That
Yeah,
becomes personal, right? Like really
it messes
personal.
with your school and your academics and your motivation. And like,
Your
I tell
emotional
kids like,
health and all that kind of stuff.
for sure, like
Yeah,
the worst place you could ever be in is like waking up and thinking, what's the point?
yeah,
If you
yeah,
get to that point, like find a different school, right?
yeah,
Like you
yeah,
need to
yeah,
go.
yeah,
You should wake up and still be motivated. So
yeah.
I think, I mean,
That's very true. That is a great point. And I just remember back to my days, right? Like you better believe my soccer life impacted my who I saw of myself, what I thought of myself, and all those different factors that if it didn't go well, it impacted who I was, and vice versa, right? Like it just
Yep.
so it's totally much more ingrained than what you realize.
It's the same reason as like, it's still college soccer where,
Yeah,
I mean, you might look like, oh, this game's going to be great, but one of your best players, their girlfriend just broke up with them the day before, right? And
yeah,
like they're not playing well. Like
yeah, yeah,
you can't take life out of the game and you can't
yeah,
take
yeah,
the game out of life. It's all
yeah,
intertwined, and
yeah, yeah,
the psychology of players I think is huge,
yeah,
probably overlooked by
yeah,
by
yeah.
most people.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Well, I think it's convenient too because that's the hard stuff. I look at the player. The easy stuff is, from it's the soccer. Like, hey, I can coach you. I can tell you how to kick a ball. I could. That's relatively easy. You're having some emotional ups and downs. Holy smokes, man! I'm gonna step away. I have no idea how to help you, right?
Yeah.
Because that's so hard. Like I think
Yep.
that's the hard part.
I would actually say I like that part of the job more than.
Oh, totally. I could totally see why, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's much more meaning to how you impact a player when he's sitting across from you in your office telling you he's having a rough time academically or socially or what have you. And it's not necessarily, I could totally see that. I could totally see that would be more impactful.
Yeah, and I think we get an array of guys, right, from like so many different backgrounds. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just like, and I'm sure every college coach has it, but the stories that you could tell of like what life has thrown at players that are 18 to 22 that you're like, your heart just breaks for them,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know? Like
yeah,
we've had players that, single mom stole their, financial aid check because
yeah,
she couldn't pay for the house and now he
yeah,
can't pay for his college. Like, I mean, just like
it's
some of the
crazy.
backgrounds in life that happens to players is,
Yeah,
and it's not just at Cortland, like that's everywhere,
yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm sure every college coach has
yeah,
could write a book on the stories of life that kind of impact their players.
yeah. To one
And
degree or
that's probably
another,
the most,
everyone has a broken experience, like it's
for
just
sure.
broke, like something's fundamentally broken, and you just have to learn how to deal with that, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah. So, and I think so, like as you go on, you're like, that's the X's and O's is not really what wins you games,
No,
right? It's just like,
yeah, yeah,
um, you need better players. That's number
yeah,
one. Recruiting is huge.
yeah,
It's that's like it's hard to overcome. If you just have better players, you're going to win most of your games.
yeah.
And then two, just being more of like a life coach and just making
Mm-hmm.
sure you guys, aren't stressed and are driven, motivated, eating well, sleeping well, like
Yeah,
just like how's life going usually is going to impact, the team dynamic a lot more than sitting with them for an extra 15 minutes,
yeah,
with a magnet whiteboard.
yeah, yeah. It's very true. I think it was you who said it, right? Like one of the first interviews we had, and like you're with these guys, and it's like the COVID time, like you're with these guys for 9 months, right? Where soccer is not what's necessarily on the table.
Hmm.
And so you're dealing with all this stuff in 9 months to get them into a good spot so that when the 3 month soccer season starts, they're in a good frame of mind and they're all raring to go. But
Yep.
it's the 9 months that you're dedicating your time to making sure that they're healthy, all those different things, right? I think that's
Yep.
the. Hey, how's Colby?
He's great. He's
Yeah.
right here.
Hey, I got to have you on again, Colby.
Sounds great.
That's awesome.
Front row. He's got front row second. I asked him, I was like, well, do you want to just listen to this interview when it comes out, or do you want to be in here? He's like, no, I'm not passing up front row seats.
Let's talk about it. No,
Yeah.
no, that's awesome. Yeah, I
Oh,
gotta
he's
have
doing
him on
great.
again.
Yeah, he's doing great.
Yeah.
Really good.
Um,
He makes my life so easy.
yeah.
I can ski all winter and hang out with my daughter and whatnot because our staff
Colby,
is
don't
incredible.
do that. Make it a little bit tougher for him.
He couldn't hear you. We broke up.
Yeah,
The
it's like a
internet was
little bit of
down.
yeah, interference or something. So, gotta ask, like, or, and this goes back to the portal discussion, and you're talking, you have 4 or 5 guys, and you might have a couple more, and like how intense? I don't know if that's the right word, but how hard are you going after real freshmen? Like, is that still a key component of what you want to recruit in your class? Because now you have this other opportunity to bring in seasoned players.
Yeah. Um, For sure. I mean, if you look at like our class that just graduated, most of them were here for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and probably 75% we'll call. I don't know the exact numbers, but
Mm-hmm.
um, so I think you have to have a pretty strong coalition of 4 year guys that have just, you know, Cortland through and through,
Yeah.
you know, that was like their choice and they've been in the culture for a long time. Those are the
Institutional
guys.
knowledge,
Yeah,
right?
just like,
Yeah.
you know, your flagship guys, the
Yeah.
stewards of the program. And if you go only after the transfers, I think you miss a little bit of that.
Yeah.
So our philosophy is just like kind of split right now, split those classes in half, right? You
Mm-hmm.
need 5 or 6 probably true freshmen, and then you fill the rest with, you know,
Yeah.
the players maybe that you can get in the portal. And let's be honest, like the portal kids are probably just kids that should have come here anyways first, right? So I think sometimes like transfers get a bad rap a little bit. You're like,
Yeah.
I don't know, you just made a decision that didn't work for you,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
that's life, and you
Yeah.
pivoted. And I mean, most of them get here and they're like, yeah, I should have come here, right? Like I didn't need to go the Division 1 route.
Yeah.
Um, and I also think we all have a tendency to say, "Oh, I've got these Division 1 players coming in." You're like, "Do you?" Like, we don't have a starter from UNC coming in,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
from Wake Forest, like they're not
Yeah.
starting.
Yeah.
They're kids that like,
Vermont, you're getting the forward line from
yeah,
Vermont to
yeah,
come.
exactly. Um, and this is every, you know, at the top of the Division 3 table, like those are the kids, like the
Yeah.
kids that could go here, right? And they might have a longer path to get on the field, or they could go here and it's a little bit easier. Like that's all the kids we're looking at.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not like we weren't looking at these kids coming out of high school anyways,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like those are the kids you're trying to get, and they just end up making a different decision for themselves the first time, and then they, you know, pivot and make a decision that's a little bit better the second time.
How many of those kids would you say you had recruiting experience with before? Like, are they kids that you're like, hey, Cortland State is for you when they were a senior and they opted to go the other route, and so they knew to reach out, or for you knew to reach out to them because you had experience with them. How much of
That's
that?
at least half of every transfer that we've ever gotten. At
Mm-hmm.
least half, you know,
Yeah.
decided not to come to Cortland first because they wanted the Division 1
Right.
life.
Mm-hmm.
But we knew about them; they knew about us.
Yeah.
You know, we were like ended up being probably one of 3 or 4 schools that was their
Sure.
first call as soon as they made the decision to leave. We'll
Yeah.
put it that way. Yeah, at least half. Yeah.
Is it easier for you to deal with the guys that you've had experience with because you know them? I'm curious. This is just a pure curiosity question, right?
I
Like you're
think
not
so.
pulling a name out of a hat and being like, "This guy's going to be good at Cortland," is it?
Yeah. I mean, you've already done your homework on them a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
so that helps. And I think the conversation flows a lot easier when you're like, you know, you almost have that "I told you so" card in your pocket, and you don't say, but you could, and
Yeah.
everybody knows it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
mom and dad
No, you
know it.
got to
Everybody knows
carry
it.
it right here, like a ref.
Exactly.
Like I could pull this out at any given point, but you.
Yeah. Like, yeah, remember this place? It was a
Yeah,
great outing
yeah,
2 years ago. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and it's just like recruiting. If you start a little bit earlier and you're looking at, you know, if you get sophomores or something that come to some ID clinics and whatnot, and
yeah.
they, you know, they want to be recruited younger. I mean, you
Yeah,
just get a couple more years of getting to know them before
yeah,
they
yeah,
make their final decision. So
yeah.
I think it helps the longevity of it. Helps it.
So, so you're losing 12. You got 4 or 5. I can't 4 or whatever you said that it started in the spring, and you might have a couple more. Like, what is your entire class going to look like? Is it? Are you looking to replace 12? Are you looking to bring in 15? Are you looking to bring in 8? Is there?
I think our class, we lose 12, but we have 2 torn ACLs
Mm-hmm.
from this past season who, if everything goes right, their timeline looks like they will be cleared.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's still just such an
Right.
unknown that who knows, right? Like we can't just bank on that. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we're going to replace 12 with 14
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just be settled at a pretty similar number.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think that's the method to our madness right now.
Yeah. Do you have any limits on your roster size or no?
No,
Like, could you conceivably do whatever number? There's. So I know I spoke to the Connor Herf at Rowan,
Hmm.
the assistant coach, and I
Yep.
didn't know that Rowan is limited to their roster to 28 already.
Mm.
Yeah, so I was just curious.
Yeah, we do not.
Yeah,
We get budgeted for travel and all that
yeah, yeah,
based
yeah,
on
sure,
number.
sure.
And we're always over that.
Yeah.
But we travel with everybody. We don't,
Hmm.
we just make up with it in fundraising and
Yeah,
getting creative with that. Like our alumni support's unbelievable.
yeah,
So we've got guys that will kind of make up the difference if we need take more guys on trips. Same with NCAA tournament, like taking guys to the NCAA tournament, and
yeah.
like I'm a
You
firm
guys
believer
are
that.
unique. I will say that. I as a state school, I don't right. Not in a bad. I'm not meaning that in a bad way. Like your alumni support across a lot of sports is pretty magnificent.
Oh,
For
for sure.
that, you don't at again a Division III state school, right? Like it was not something you would expect. You'd expect that more out of a private school, or that's what you tend to see. The folks that I know who either went to Cortland years and years and years ago are still as loyal as ever, just from the
Yeah,
experience. And I think that it doesn't surprise me to say that your alumni support is really strong. Doesn't surprise me
yeah,
at all.
yeah. It's an interesting niche, like you said. I fully agree with you that
Yeah,
it's not typical at a New York State school,
right.
um,
Like I mean,
especially
I don't think
doesn't
you
do
see
it.
it at like Fredonia or right, like
Yeah,
another not to pick on them, but just at another type of state school. I think it's really
yeah,
you
and
guys are
it's
just
like
unique.
we so like every school does those like challenge days now, right? Like the
Yeah,
donation kind of days.
yeah,
Most athletics programs are competing within themselves to do it. I mean, our men's soccer program pulls in like roughly 30K a year,
yeah, yeah.
in that one
That's
day,
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
which is
remarkable.
like spread out over, 400 people.
Yeah,
We don't
yeah.
have the alums that are just going to come and drop
A
50
million
grand in your
dollars.
account by themselves.
Yeah,
But like the support of the masses is unbelievable.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, if you like next time we have one of those days, I'll send you the thing. But like the amount of donors, they keep track of that too, and it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, we're up in like four or five hundreds of people that will give to
Wow.
the program on that day, so it's
Yeah,
pretty remarkable.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, last question for you. This is a new one. It's a
I'm
new
ready.
one. Yeah, you're the guinea pig. This is not about Division III. This is not. This is about whatever soccer topic, men's, women, doesn't matter. So it's up to you how you answer. What aren't we talking about that we should be talking about?
Ooh, wow.
Did it get
Uh,
hot? Did the seat get hotter there for a moment? Like I'm.
no, but my brain's working overtime right now. Dang, good question. What are we not talking about? I mean, I think we have talked about it with the transfer thing. I just think the emphasis in recruiting, I don't know how to change the tide in that of just like
Yeah,
kids picking a better path for
yeah,
themselves. Um, and now that we have kids in club soccer, I think club soccer is just a gong show. I mean, I work in club soccer, and I mean, just the
I hate
amount of
it. Look at my
variance,
smile. I hate
yeah,
it.
the amount of variance of like how clubs are run
Yeah,
and the experience that people have, positive and negative. I mean, I think that alone is kind of crazy that like we're just not really getting a grasp on putting parameters on club soccer. It seems to me through our daughters being in club soccer that it's really just I mean, it's a travel agency masquerading around as a youth sports industry. Like it's just, you're getting 10% on hotels and
yep.
you got to stay, right? And like everything's in a destination now, and you're like, I don't know, we could round up kids from an hour away and give you the same game, right? Like it's not, it doesn't need to be what it is
Yeah,
from a cost and a travel and a like stress on the family scenario. And then I think because people put all that in, you're like, well, why wouldn't we go Division 1 if we could, right? Like, or just climbing to levels that they can't really play at. I think
yeah.
every kid thinks they're elite because every
Club
tournament's
is
called
elite.
elite, and every league is elite, you're like, I don't know. Just I think that just like our overall youth sport culture for kids, growing up in the game and then trying to like pave their way in it, right? And like credit to all the kids that really want to go for it.
Mm.
But there's something there that's
Amiss.
just like so out of touch with reality
Yeah.
in our country.
Yeah.
And I mean, here's a great example. So if we're recruiting two kids, right? An American kid and let's say a kid from overseas, a European kid, right? English kid. The English dad is gonna like talk shit about the kid. Like, you sure you want this kid? Like, I don't know, he's not great, right? Like, they just don't prop him up on a pedestal. Yet the second an American parent comes in the office, oh, I don't know if I told you, but he's got the most goals of on his team in the last 2 years. And you're like, we know, like, like we're just kind of like
Yeah.
I don't know. The youth sport culture here is kind of crazy. Like
Yeah.
parents are just propping their kids up as if they're the next, you know, big time professional player, and there's not a lot of realistic expectations on players of like what level they're at and how to get to another level and what that difference is. And I don't know, the inflation of youth sports and just that whole scenario is kind of
That's
crazy. Maybe
that's
we should talk
fine.
about that. That's
That
my answer.
yeah. That's a great answer. I will say one of the things I started asking myself, like, because I do these things where I go through these mental exercises where I just look at something and I start to ask questions about it just to see how deep it is. Like that's how you find whether there's depth to it or whether it's super shallow or what. And I started asking myself about youth soccer, what is the point?
Hmm.
Right? And if the point is to find the best 22, 25, whatever it is, players for the national teams, men's and women's, okay, let's just have a conversation about that and admit to that. But it strikes me as that there's millions upon millions of kids who will never, ever, ever come close to that. So what's the point for them? And
Hmm.
I think we don't have that answer. And I think that's what makes it a mess, I think, in my mind. I just don't.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, any parent probably says, well, any parent that's, well, I shouldn't say that. Most parents are a little bit off the mark maybe nowadays, but
Yeah.
I mean, anybody that like really cares about their kid, right? Like you want, uh, the work ethic, the
Yeah.
drive, the commitment to a team, right? The day that they're tired, but they have to go to practice anyways. Like you want those life lessons out of
Yeah.
youth sports. I think those are great.
Yeah.
Competitiveness,
Yeah.
right? How to work in a team framework. Like
Yeah.
all of those things are amazing, but we don't
In
see
of
it as like,
themselves,
right.
agreed. Totally agree. In of themselves.
But
Yeah.
we don't see as parents, I think, like, well, this is what my paycheck to youth sports is providing us. We
Yeah.
think, well, this paycheck is something else,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
alluded to. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what people really think that is, but
Yeah.
like very few people in the club world that I've met, parents that maybe like aren't in the college system and don't have a lot of knowledge on it, like they're just hyper crazed on, why don't, my kids got asked to go to this elite ABC, whatever. And you're like,
Yeah.
it's like the seventh
There-
division of U12. Like, what are we
yeah.
talking about? You're like,
Yeah.
everything's called elite.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're just like
Oh,
fueling this, like,
Elite Academy. There you
yeah,
go. Wrapped up into one name.
extra elite. It's going to be extra elite. It
Extra
has to
elite.
be. Yeah.
Titanium elite.
Yeah. There's too many elites already.
Yeah, yeah.
Super duper elite.
I do think like there is a sense among, and I was not that guy. I was just more like, look, I'm paying for you because you enjoy it. Like if
Hmm.
you find no joy in this stops because it's not worth. Life's too hard. Life's too. You're right. Like you have to find joy in it, and if you don't, that's fine. I don't care. This is your life. But I do think to your point, I think a lot of parents do have this impression that I am writing you a check, Coach Axtell, because you are telling me you're going to take this check, and then the next thing you know, my son or daughter is going to go to UNC to wait, like you, right? And that is not there.
Yep.
You could never do that. You could never do that, right? Like,
And I think I mean, we've just like greased the tracks for like young kids to be roped into
yeah,
this really expensive soccer experience before we truly know that that's what they love.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Oh,
I mean,
totally, totally.
we're paying for that at age 6, 7, 8,
Yeah,
9,
yeah,
10. Like, you don't know if the kid truly loves that yet.
yeah.
but they're on that path. And I
Yeah.
think once you're on that path, it's hard to divert
Get
from it.
off.
Like, well, we've
It's
put so much time and effort into this. Why
yeah.
would we quit?
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting that I don't know if every kid on all these club teams actually loves it.
Yeah. Oh
And
no,
if
I
I'm
could.
watching club soccer, it's so vanilla to me that I don't know if they do love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Great. That is a great point. I often watch. I watch, and where I'm at, and sort of where the simple players have played, and all that. Like I watch, and I'm just kind of like so unimpressed at how not such an emotional game is not emotional because, like I said,
for
there's
sure.
no, there's nothing that drives a kid in the game. Like it just,
Yep.
I find it remarkable. I'm like, how is it possible that this game became this? And it just totally, it saddens me, right? Because my experience was completely different. I was that guy. Like, I want to play. I'll go play out on the street. If somebody's got a ball, I'm going to go play, right? And it's
Yep.
not that way. It's
I
not
actually
that way.
didn't end up playing myself. And again, this is different times. I
Yeah.
sound like a boomer, but um, like I didn't start playing like really competitive club soccer, Premier or whatever,
Yeah.
it was called back then, until I was a U15.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until
It
then
took
it
me
was like,
coming back to I did a little bit in Spain, but it took me coming back to the States to actually play club ball, and it wasn't.
yeah. But until then, I don't know if my parents knew I loved it enough to pay
Yeah,
that amount of money.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
just keep doing your thing here.
yeah.
And it was more of organic in my process of like, well, are you the best kid in town? Yes. Okay. Well, let's find a little bit bigger avenue, right? And like, it kind of grew. It wasn't this, well, we need to find a team for you at 8 that's going to be, considered the best in, the city.
Yeah.
Like, there was none of that. It was just like we exponentially don't care what you do as parents.
Yeah,
And by 14, I was like, this is my thing. It's all I want to do, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
completely locked in.
yeah.
But until then, like, I was just a normal kind of played rec soccer and different sports. And like, you know,
It,
the love for it came before
yeah,
the commitment from my
the
parents to
commitment.
go into
Yeah,
the club
yeah, yeah,
soccer route. And I think it's the opposite right now.
yeah. It's good analogy, like good explanation. It was as a player. Hey, here's your soccer experience. Are you better? Then maybe we should sort of figure out what that next layer is or what that further expansive opportunity for you to see how well you fit. And it almost strikes me as everyone's going the opposite direction where they're saying, put Johnny on the best team, I will pay. And then you get upset when you're like, he's not playing because he's not as good and
Yep.
is whatever, and then they drop them down, and then it's suddenly they're like, this is terrible. It's like a terrible experience for people because they had this expectation that they're the best and they're not, right? Like the game is not that way. So
Yeah. And I think that's all levels of youth soccer too. I mean, even, the kids that play in MLS Next, which is regarded on the boys' side like the best
yeah,
in our country, like not every one of them can play here. Like there's
no,
so many MLS Next players that are not good enough to play here, which is a high level Division 3.
yeah,
But
yeah,
they're
yeah.
being sold this bill of goods that
Oh,
at a
totally.
young age that,
Yeah,
I mean, the amount
totally.
of kids that don't give us the time of day because it's Division 3 and then end up either not playing, right? They quit the sport or whatever it is, and they're like, well, I didn't get the right opportunity, or, somehow they got screwed in this whole thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Like you just weren't good enough.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's a reality to the game that I
And
don't
it
think we're.
also tells you to what we said earlier, their passion for it.
Mhm.
Is this just an exercise for them, or do they really love it? Because if they really love it, they'll end up somewhere. Might not be the fit right. It might not be the biggest best, but man, they're going to get their soccer experience because they just love the sport, which is sort of the way it turned out for me.
For sure. Yeah, and I think there's, the tricky one is like the kind of the mediocre player that's really high academic, right? That's a
Yeah,
hard fit to find.
yeah,
Most of your really high academic schools are also follow suit in
yeah,
athletics because they're highly sought after.
yeah,
So those kids I think part ways with the game earlier than most.
yeah,
Aside from that small niche of super high academic mediocre soccer player, aside from that, yeah, I think kids are, yeah, I just don't know if they like have that passion that you see out of kids from other countries, let's say,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like everybody's real quick to complain about the influx of international players at the Division
It
One, Division
says
Two
some.
level, all that. But by and large, it's a different player. It's a different kid. They come with a passion. They come with like, you
Yeah.
know,
I
they're there for
had a
you.
conversation. I'm torn on this, right? Like again, because I've been in the U.S. for so long, and it's like it's my country, and I want to see American players do better and succeed. And so the whole foreign influx, to a certain extent, bothers me that it displaces, in some cases, large numbers of American players, right? Like it just
Mhm,
that's and it happens at MLS too. Don't get
mhm,
at like our professional league does that. It's like it's bringing in all these foreign players to the detriment of American players. But on the flip side of that, there's a reason for that, and I do think it ends up being here are guys who, for whatever reason, they're in their home countries and realize the difficulty of playing professional soccer wherever
mhm,
they're from, and no guarantee they're going to get anywhere with it, but they still want to play. And lo and behold, they have an opportunity to come to the United States, foreign country that a lot of people just dream about going to.
mhm.
And I'm going to get an education and I'm going to get to play soccer, which is unheard of anywhere else in the world. I think that's the other thing we got to keep in mind is how unique we are in that regard.
For sure.
And I think
Well,
that's what ends up driving guys here.
yeah. Well, and
You know?
everybody's quick to say, like, well, the NCAA should put limits on it. And you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
why don't we just make better players? Like,
Yeah, well,
I
that's
mean,
it.
it's
That's
a
the
true
torn
free
part.
market,
I'm like,
right?
if you
Like,
were
it's a true free
better,
market
this wouldn't be an issue.
for sure.
Yeah,
But like, and I think that's the same as like when you take a true meritocracy out of something,
yeah. Hmm.
right? Like, you're not actually achieving anything, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're not advancing
yeah,
the whole.
yeah.
You're just saying, well, you can't play here because you're
Because
from a
yeah,
different
the
country or
door is
whatever.
closed. Like it doesn't. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so, yes, our kids would have more opportunities, but that doesn't mean that they're better players for it,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know?
Man,
So I think, yeah, youth system,
yeah.
kind of
That
crazy.
was a good one for a guinea pig. That was a good way
Right
to
off the
rip the
cuff.
band. Yeah.
Lucky I had my coffee.
I'm gonna be thinking about this. I have to take my youngest to practice tonight, so that'll definitely be. Which I sit in the parking lot and it's like, what am I doing? What is the point of all this nonsense?
I'm taking mine to practice tonight too, and sometimes I'll go in the building. We're indoors here in New
Uh-huh.
York, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Sometimes I'll go in and just watch, and I like to be incognito, like wherever I go, usually, like
Corner.
wherever
I'm
I
that
go.
crazy guy in the corner by myself.
Yeah.
Don't bother me.
But I mean, you just overhear these conversations. You're like, God, and it's just mind blowing,
Yeah,
just the expectation and how the parents are viewing what's going on. You're like, oh man,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
no wonder.
yeah. All right, Coach. This was fantastic as always. Really, you are. You know what? Just for the sake of argument and stirring the pot, you are my favorite coach to come on. If you compare Tufts and Cortland, you're my favorite.
Love it. Take that, Des.
Yeah, take that.
I'll tell you what,
Um,
this is good. This is good because I've been telling Des, I'm like, look, man, we haven't gotten together. Like, I haven't seen you in person in a while. We
yeah,
got to get this on the schedule. And,
I'm gonna shoot
we've had a
after
couple
this.
things.
I am gonna shoot an email. I'm gonna be like, I want to do a show with the two of you,
Cage
whatever
match.
a cage match. You guys can talk. We can talk about whatever. I'll just sit
Yeah,
there, and I just want to see that.
that would be great. That would
All
be
right.
good content.
Yeah. 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 Let's do it. Let's do it. All right, Coach. Thank you very much. Do appreciate it. Colby, great seeing you, buddy. I'll have you on. I'll shoot you an email.
Good to see you too, man.
Yep.
All
And
right, take care. Thanks for
yeah.
everything you do. These are great.
Yeah. Thank you.